When we look at the infantry transport vehicles from before and during the Second World War, we will notice that in both the Allied armies and the Axis forces, there are many designs of half-track vehicles. These were extensively used during the conflict, gaining worldwide fame and becoming truly historic vehicles. But despite being so widely used and quite effective after the conflict, the half-tracks disappeared almost completely and without warning. Have you ever wondered why this happened? And in the first place, why did half-tracks exist? What advantages did this peculiar design bring? Today we will answer all these questions. The idea of military half-tracks emerged almost at the end of World War I with the appearance of the tank and its subsequent updates that made them increasingly faster. In the British Army, they needed to find a way to make the infantry keep up with the tanks. The tanks, being motorized vehicles, did not take breaks. Having the infantry practically running behind the tanks was a problem. Therefore, motorizing the infantry was the most logical measure. This would give rise to motorized infantry with trucks or even motorcycles. Now the mobility of the infantry was not limited by their physical endurance and gave the infantry the ability to carry artillery and supplies with them. This gave great agility to the infantry, but the trucks were not armored and obviously could not defend themselves, so they were susceptible to enemy fire and ambushes. In addition, the trucks were good on roads but had many problems cross-country, so engineers had to design a vehicle that would run well both on roads and cross-country, that could carry a large amount of weight and at the same time be light to be fast, that was armored and armed, and in case of an ambush that the troops were very safe and that of course could be deployed quite quickly. Already since the end of the 19th century, half-tracks were being extensively used in a lot of fields such as tractors or to transport heavy things or as diesel engines or even steam. Keeping in mind the mobility requirements of the battlefields, tracks seemed the most logical option to apply to vehicles for transporting troops at that time. Already in the 30s, shortly before World War II, a myriad of half-track vehicles began to emerge in all the world powers to originate and consolidate the concept of mechanized infantry. For the Germans, the concept fit like a glove, because with the rise of fascist Germany and the new government, the new strategic paradigms for Blitzkrieg would emerge, which to function needed a fast, flexible, and above all reliable infantry. Being able to cross any natural or climatic obstacle was essential for the Blitzkrieg. Therefore, in 1933, as soon as the new government emerged, it began to develop a myriad of half-track vehicles based on existing designs. Mostly, these new vehicles were focused on the transport of artillery pieces and logistics, like the SDKF-10 used to move artillery, the SDKF-2, which were motorcycles with half-tracks for paratroopers being transported in the Junker Ju-52 or the SDK, FZ-8 that were used to move artillery and infantry being one of the most produced, as 4,000 of these were produced and were used in the invasion of Poland, the Battle of France, and in the Balkans. There were many designs of German half-tracks, but probably the pinnacle of the German half-tracks was the SDKFZ's 251. It was an armored personnel carrier, and one of the first to have decent effectiveness. It had light armor of 14 millimeters at its strongest points, inclined at quite open angles to benefit from the advantages of the inclined armor. This could resist shots from anti-material rifles, although later ammunition capable of penetrating the armor was developed. It had at least one MG-34 or 42 machine gun and could carry up to 10 soldiers protected from enemy infantry who could shoot from inside because the vehicle was open on top. This, of course, could cross country without problems thanks to its transport system based on a half-track. 15,252 of these were produced. They were quite useful, and even to support the German infantry, Germany would be one of the nations that would take the most advantage of half-track technology, but the Americans also had large track vehicles. First would come the M2 half-track based on the Citroën Gris, a car that was used as a base for many half-track vehicles. The M2 was a multi-purpose vehicle for transporting artillery, logistics, and for use as reconnaissance. But probably the best American half-track and probably also the best in the world along with the SDKFZ 251 was the M3 half-track based on the M2. The M3 half-track was an armored personnel carrier usually equipped with a 12.7mm M2 Browning and a 7.62mm M 1919. During World War II they were mass produced. Approximately 15,000 of these were produced and 50,000 of its variants were also supplied to the Red Army and a number of British Commonwealth nations during World War II and the Cold War. It could carry 3 crew members and 10 soldiers with all their equipment, and these soldiers could fire from inside the vehicle. All these vehicles, particularly the SDKFZ 251 and the M3 half-tracks, were quite good vehicles that gave many advantages to the infantry. The half-tracks could be driven by drivers with little experience. With tracked vehicles, they had a lower maintenance cost and were very cheap to produce compared to all the utility they had. But if they were so good, the half-tracks, why did they stop being manufactured? Or why are there no new half-track armored infantry transports? Basically, the half-tracks disappeared not because they were bad, but because their successors with full tracks or wheels were much better. Armored personnel carriers with full tracks or wheels emerged during and after the Second World War. They had many advantages over the half-tracks. The designs with full tracks or wheels completely covered the soldiers, much more armor, and they were much shorter. They could even be much faster. The most substantial advantage of vehicles with full tracks or wheels was the great firepower they have, which is superior to that of half-track vehicles. Vehicles with full tracks or wheels have heavy machine guns or even low-caliber cannons in covered turrets that could give them chances to face better armored vehicles. Also, after the Second World War, half-tracks became unnecessary. One of the premises of the half-tracks is that you could take a truck driver and put him to drive a half-track because they were basically very easy to drive, and this was good because there were many armored personnel transport vehicles, many more than tanks, and it was difficult to have trained drivers in such an intense conflict. But after the Second World War ended, there was no longer pressure to train personnel. They could take the time they needed to train personnel to drive vehicles with full tracks, and basically the half-tracks for transporting troops were created from already created designs that were already being manufactured at that time. So the main reasons for their existence were to meet a need in the cheapest way possible. So after the conflict and without pressures, nations were able to create better armored personnel transport vehicles without any pressure and better adapted to the emerging new military strategies.